Hello, transportation class. Miss Parson again. This week, I would like to give you just a little bit of information regarding some of the chapter topics that we're discussing. Chapter 7, Airlines. Think about air travel. Air travel is simply a way from getting us to point A and point B. Well, that can also be the same thing to goods that you order online or from certain companies that ship to other companies across the world, across the region. So air travel is very important to the health of the U.S. economy, and I know that you agree with that. As consumers, we see the important linkages and why air travel is so vital to keeping our supply chain alive. As I was preparing for this lecture today, a couple of things I had found I want to share with you. First of all, something I found that was so interesting, if you are a statistical person, in 2007 it said for hire air carriers had a total operating revenues of $173.1 billion, of which $107.0 billion of that money actually was attributed to passenger airline travel. Kind of some great little figures to think about, huh? Now, the next thing I want y'all to think about is that in 2003, the air carriers transported over 15.2 billion revenue tons per miles, or approximately 0.4% of total intercity ton miles. So you think about the big trucks, but how about these big airplanes that are carrying the cargo? I think next time you go and you travel and go use one of our airlines, I bet you think about not just where you're sitting, but what's in the back of the plane, what it's hauling, and what's maybe under. And I bet you're thinking, I wonder how much money is being transported in this plane. I bet you'd be surprised. Also, this chapter wants you to understand a few of the objectives. One of our chapter objectives is to be sure to become aware of the operating and service characteristics of airline transportation, as well as current trends that's facing the airlines today, and also appreciate the impacts of fuel and labor costs on airlines and cost structures. Now, this chapter has about 8 objectives. I'm not going to outline each one of them because the book does an awesome job of explaining that to you, and it is a few things that is common knowledge, but I picked out just a few that I would want to make sure you guys kind of understand the importance, and that of course is the current trends that are facing us today, as well as the fuel costs and labor costs. So think about this, with the fuel cost and labor costs that are increasing daily, think about how the current trends, think about the recent downturn in the economy, the recession, and also now inflation. Those are all things that affect the operation. Think about how much money is being lost. Jobs are being lost because of that. Now, those things are improving now with a little upturn in the economy, but you've got to realize there's a few other things when we talk about the operating and service characteristics of airline transportation. Some other facts and figures I wanted to share with you guys regarding that. In general, as my research found that major revenue source for air carriers is passenger transportation. In the year 2007, approximately 61.8% of total operating revenues were derived from passenger transportation. So those are some staggering figures. And then in 2007, about 14.2% of the total operating costs were generated from freight transportation. Now we think about the other costs, the whole cost structure of air travel. We talk about the equipment, the types of vehicles. Okay, well, we know that airplanes wouldn't exactly be classified as vehicles, but it is a type. There's different sizes of airplanes. There's cargo planes, passenger planes, of course. Then think about the terminals, how much money it costs to operate the airport terminals each year. And then also there's the cost structures. And that, of course, is something that can be applied across the board, not just to air travel, but to our railroads. Remember that from last chapter? And also remember that the fuel costs are something that the motor carriers have to face. Well, so do the airline travels. Now think about this. Escalating fuel costs have caused problems in the past for airlines. Of course, we probably know that just by being consumers and reading stories every day on the news. And by December 2007, it says a price per gallon of aviation fuel was $2.10 per gallon. Well, we gripe about having to pay that much for motor vehicle gas. But think about those big old airplanes and how many gallons they require. So that was probably when you started seeing the major impact in the cost structure. A couple of other things regarding these are going to be fixed and variable costs. So we know that fuel costs can fall under the variable expenses, and also labor. Now labor can go in between fixed and variable. We do know that sometimes. But with 9/11 and increased safety concerns, strict safety regulations, it said, that are administered by the FFA with acceptable flight operations as well as hours of service. Those are being specified for our pilots. Those are things that actually are the variable cost that affect the cost of labor. And maybe 20 years prior, that wasn't such a big thing. So I think that falls under variable because that wasn't always the case 20 years before 9/11, or even maybe 10 years before 9/11. So that's something interesting to think about. As you read through this chapter, one other item I want you to be aware of is thinking about the overall. This all falls under the operating efficiency of airlines, and operating efficiency also falls under the motor carriers as well in your railroads. But operating ratio, that's something we kind of got introduced into the last couple of chapters, 5 and 6. You got your operating ratio equals operating expense divided by operating income, and you multiply that by 100. So that is in a measure that is used in operating efficiency. It's used by the air carriers in the operating ratio. Just remember this, though. The only income and expenses generated from passenger and freight transportation are considered. As you read through this chapter, you will pay special attention to the operating ratios. There are several different scenarios in your book that you can practice. I do think that you need to go through those. They're very simple ratios to figure out. There's nothing really complicated in this chapter math-wise. So I know we all appreciate that. But I hope as you go through the study questions and go through the activities for Chapter 7, you will begin to appreciate more air travel. So transportation class, this is kind of, again, my living PowerPoint for Chapter 7. Have a great one.